Yeah, thank you. Thank you, Christian, for this like very nice introduction. Just to make sure, like, yeah, you see how slides changes. Yeah, okay, great. So Christian introduced me, like he's right. Like in comparison to other papers we had in this series, it will be strongly like theoretical, as you can see in this like cover like slide when you have like covers of books. And I will be talking about developing oligopolies through hegemonic cycle and methodological challenges of word system analysis of scholarly communication. And partially it is like partially inspired by my work in like Christian Grant on like academic capitalism, partially inspired by my current postdoc in Trinity, founded by Nava. Uh, and yeah, I have to change this menu. Oh yeah. And then the presentation plan is I have like few stages of this presentation. And first stage, like first I think major challenge in like applying word system analysis to scholarly communication is to explain many misconceptions and conflations in the discussions about academic centers and peripheries that are present in the literature. Then I will try to discuss how to make, especially Emmanuel's Wallace in word system analysis, where is the place of the academia, where is the place of the academic knowledge production. I will highlight the stability, relevant stability of the role of the publishers in this system. Then I will turn to the like central theme of this presentation. It is like hegemonic cycles. That is like the idea developed by Emmanuel Arrighi as like some corrections to the Wallerstein proposition. And then I think I will be able to propose some like methodological rules for studying like scholarly communication that will be able to overcome at least some challenges of like people who experience like peripherization of scholarly communication in their region. So I will end with the example of like peripherization of scholarly communication in Poland in the 90s. And starting with the question like that is like quite important. So why actually do we need word systems analysis of scholarly communication? And I'm starting with like I think very well-known paper for everyone like studying like scholarly communication, that is Lariviere and colleagues, who a few years ago pointed out that actually current state of academic publishing in like international like English space, it is dominated by and exploited by oligopoly of few big academic like corporations, academic publishers, that is like Elsevier, Tyler and Francis, while Brackwell, Springer, Sage, that have more than half of the journals in SSH, Social Science and Humanities. Few of these publishers have more than half of these journals in Science and Medicine, and that leads to a situation. And for example, even the wealthiest universities cannot subscribe to all relevant journals for them. And recently, as I was checking, like the publishing, for example, open access paper in Nature costs $12,000, which is the price that in some like peripheral countries you can like hire someone for a few months or something, or something like that. So like this steadily increasing like prices, this steadily increasing like limits to the publications in higher educations are like widely like criticized among academic community. Like we have initiative like um, Paris. Oh, I forgot the name, but like we have like many initiatives that try to like criticize this status quo, like to boycott, for example, like Elsevier, etc. But like the movements towards open access, like aimed at changing a little this situation, but to to large extent this situation is still present and is still relevant. And I will argue in this like presentation that word system analysis could help us develop methodology, which in Krystian Szatkowski and Jakub Krzeski in their like recently published book like describe this like idea of this like Marxist like methods for critical study of higher education that is like in, against, in, beyond. So like it is in some like empirical reality, some like real problem against some like exploitation, which in this case is like exploitation of this academic oligopoly, and goes like help us to go beyond this state of things. So like first challenge in building this like world system perspective is misconceptions about what are centers and peripheries of knowledge production. And I'm sure most of you are familiar with the book on the left. I think Immanuel Wallerstein and his idea of like centers and peripheries exploiting centers exploiting like peripheral regions of productions are quite well known to you. I'm not sure how much you are familiar with like Joseph Ben David, but for sure like the Wallerstein concept was already like discussed in this seminar. I won't be like referring to all the details of the conception. But like strangely enough, when I was recently looking at the papers in journals published in higher education journals, like Wallerstein is quite rarely cited reference to explain what are centers and peripheries of knowledge productions, like how these inequalities are created. Definitely the most cited person is Philip Altbach, that he almost in half of the papers I encountered. It was Philip's Altbach's papers that were used to define what are centers and peripheries. And as we can see in the quote in the upper left, it is also sometimes Philip Altbach is portrayed as someone who is developing some kind of world system analysis of higher education, of centers and peripheries, which I will show like soon that is quite far from true. And I can also recommend you like very interested seminar we had like few years ago in this series with Simon Margison and Xing Xu, where they also criticized using like centers and peripheries in higher education, and it provoked like very also interesting discussion with Christians as their discussant. But I would say that also they overly like credited Wallerstein for some misconceptions about like centers and peripheries of higher education, where rather I think Altbach and his inspirations are much more to blame. Because when we look at the like cited papers and like book chapters of Philip Altbach, we do not find them like any reference to like Wallerstein, Christopher Chase Dune, or Giovanni Arrighi, but rather to like Chicago, US Chicago, like sociologist Edward Shields, who wrote a lot about like centers and peripheries, and his like student, Israeli sociologist Joseph Ben David. That are the main like theoretical like inspirations that Altbach have to develop his ideas. And when we look further on works of these people, then we see like quite different, quite contrasting views, especially in terms of like their political position. That means they are like present strongly anti-Marxist approach. So like, although they argue that like centers influences peripheries much than like periphery centers, that is like the main idea against like centers and peripheries in like intellectual communities for them, which is not fully contradictory with approach developed by Wallerstein, they are also like strongly arguing that there is no relationship between the class interest and content of science or philosophy. They also see a danger of currently developing, like currently in like 70s, 80s, of developing research that being replaced by progressive educational experiments based on neo-Marxist doctrine. That is like quote from Ben David. They are critics of like my 68 student protests, like that they feel that they somehow undermine this like intellectual like center of society that gave its unity. And to make it is like quotation mark because it is a little simplified, but like we don't have so much time for all the details, so we can say that they're closer to like modernization theory than like dependency theory that studies dependency between centers and peripheries, but rather they study how peripheries can modernize to be center. And it is actually quite hard to pinpoint in Ben David what is the crucial like theoretical difference between him and Wallerstein. And um, he proposed also some quite interesting ideas. And for example, he developed this critique of cultural nationalism, and he criticized that national intellectual elites gain sympathy from the masses of like the peripheral state, because like the masses also feel, for example, that like centers like British Empire or any empire we are talking about, that they also somehow feel like inferior to them. And when the intellectual elite like criticize this like inferiority, they get like sympathy for the masses. But he says mostly this like cultural like peripheral elite like act selflessly. They just want to have like this elite position in their community that they are able to reproduce by themselves, and they do not develop any like real scientific knowledge that would help to develop the whole society. And this is quite interesting argument that could be somehow connected with like Wallerstein approach against like nationalism movement and against thinking too much about reforming society through independent state. But then like Ben David like goes further, and he says that in such situation political arguments against dependency are more important for this nationalist than universal science. And as we can see on this quote, it end up with the conclusion that actually like it is a competition on international level that is a true measure of science. So we can read this quote like that: the condition that determines whatever the nationalization of academic life will contribute to the quality of culture is whatever local intellectuals have proved themselves in competition with their metropolitan colleagues and have attained international level prior to nationalization. So why he is against like nationalism, like it seems that the only solution for nationalism is to be included in this like international competition between academics. And it is connected with like broader like set of assumptions, so like that the content of science is not anyhow like determined by like cultural and political factor, that criteria for scientific knowledge are relatively like stable, and that we can somehow measure people hired in science, their publication, discoveries, Nobel Prizes, spending on science, and that it says us something about like centers and peripheries, which is again, for example, Joseph Ben David have quite rational approach to that. Like he says that we cannot fully like trust that metrics, and we need a lot of metrics and etc. So I think that what is the mostly specific for him is not this like overly trusting like some extracted metrics, but rather this assumption that like the key measure or like the key quality of science is revealed in this like international competition of academic. And the central question starts to be like how to organize knowledge production and higher education to become an international center. And as we will see, like the Wallerstein's proposition is quite different than that. And which is maybe surprising for you, maybe not. Like probably the most visible difference between like Wallerstein is actually that like in any work of Wallerstein, and he wrote a lot about word system, we cannot really find that he would be saying about something about centers and peripheries of higher education. It means that we have like central university and it is competing with some like peripheral university in this like little abstracted like academic competition that Ben David and Shields are talking about. Wallerstein is talking mostly about like centers and peripheries in terms of economic production, and universities, as we will see, have a role in that. But he's not really talking about competition between universities in itself. And on the one hand, it is a omission. Like Wallerstein is not so focused on like studying science and production of academic knowledge. But on the other hand, I think there is like quite important like intuition here that actually this like international competition only between academics is not so crucial factors as, for example, Ben David, as Shields are thinking. So what are universities for Wallerstein? And then, as I said, like this is not very like it's not so easy to reconstruct this from his work because he's not so much focused on this topic. But especially from the like his late works and from his like very early work. It is like this university in turmoil that was created even before he fully developed like his word system analysis. We can see like that this somehow like twofold structure in the university for him. So for the on the one hand, university built like this geoculture, this like some ideology of the whole world system. Also, some like state ideology gives some like base for like the national identity, train qualified workers, and develop also like some geoculture in the world system that is for Wallerstein like liberal geoculture that tries to convince people that only through some like rational, moderate like reforms of the state we can have like we can have any like social emancipation. But and this is some kind of like that the university mostly for Wallerstein serves this like ideological role for the state and also some like training of the qualified workers. But also Wallerstein points out that there is some like inherent like chaos and turmoil in the university that is especially starting to be present from the protest of the 68, but also that is somehow inherent in the idea of the university. So like so the Wallerstein writes that to the idea of the university as well as the idea lead to a perpetual tension, more or less well masked. No image of the university was ever more fallacious than that of the ivory tower. No university has ever or could ever be one. Rather, the university has always been and will always be a terrain of conflict. The work of the university is not a peace, but combat, intellectual combat, and in one form or another, social combat. What the university does, what it seeks to represent, it's too important for anyone to permit its tranquility. A tranquil university is a dead university, one that has renounced itself as an idea and ideal. So we can sense that it is a quite different, quite distinctive approach to like studying science, academic production, and like university than those focus on like international competition as Ben David and Shields. And it is connected with like broader assumptions about terrorizing from world system perspective that we can like reconstruct from Wallerstein works, and that for once, like that theoretical structural reflection has to be conducted simultaneously with historical inquiry, and that's why the second half of the presentation I will have like a lot of much more historical empirical examples. From the beginning, also like Wallerstein develops like very unidisciplinary approach. Like he's against like disciplinary division. Like if you want to like study this like complex connection between like the capital, the state, the university, the knowledge productions, we need to go somehow against this like narrow divisions for like sociology, economy, history, etc. He argues definitely for like a global perspective, treating like capitalist world system as a unit of analysis. And also, he argues that we theorize the structures that have their like some historical beginning and that they will have their historical end, which is also quite distinctive from, for example, many recent like studies on like centers and peripheries in higher education, but also definitely from like Ben David and Shields. So like as we can see in this like image on the right, I think that reading like world system like analysis, how the capitalism developed over the centuries, we all the time have to think that like the perspective which also Wallerstein develops is that at some point the system will collapse and somehow we have to deal with that. We have to think what kind of chaos it will produce, how this collapse can look like, etc. But like from this and previous slide, one can argue that actually, or like wonder more precisely, one can wonder like are precisely some kind of like centers and peripheries in academia for Wallerstein. Because if he highlights so much this like chaos and turmoil and combat at the university are some stable centro-peripheral structures in academia, in knowledge production for Wallerstein. And through idea of hegemony, we can see that yes, and one of the most concrete manifestations of such quite stable relations between centers and peripheries related to academia is publishing market. And so like first, what is hegemony for Wallerstein? So like hegemony is a state, is a hegemonic state is a state so strong that it do not need mercantilism, it do not need to protect its own market, and a state that accumulates the most from the whole global trade. But also this process like triggers many processes, like for example increased demand of the members of the state to have higher wages, etc. And because like many of these like structural factors, this like hegemony is like state that cyclically like fades away. And like Wallerstein said that from the like 17th centuries it is like united provinces, then like we have like hegemony of UK, and then in the 20th century we have like hegemony of USA, and it also starting to fade away. And this like state of hegemony has like important implication also for science, so like that it allows for like cultural liberalization, serves allows the state to serve as a model for other states, and increase the level of technological development of the state, and strangely enough like provides some pluralism and freedom of speech. And to better understand that, we can see the example of the United Provinces, like in the seventh, now like Netherlands in the 17th centuries, and the famous publishing house of Elsevier, which shares mostly the name with the current publisher, shares the name with the current publisher of Elsevier, because there is no like continuity in running business, but also shares all the privilege of like being developed in the Netherlands. So like Wallerstein, when he reconstructs this like 17th century like hegemony, states that the United Province during the period of hegemony were masters of like cheap labor, slave trade, technological advancement, and low-cost goods transportation. It allows also this development of like publishing market, this like whole wealth, and publishers like Elsevier were able to publish philosophers like René Descartes or Galileo, and penetrates the English market, earning enormous profit from monopoly, and also enormous profits from monopoly on printing academic theses in Leiden. And in this situation, when the culture was somehow liberalized, the profits were like the highest in the whole system, etc., we can observe this like crucial connection where the advancement of science becomes to some extent dependent on the maximum accumulation within the capitalist world system. So like that in this situation, this like both like the states like the state profits from the high development of science, but also like the publishing is able to flourish because of that. And as if we will look at all the publishers from the oligopoly history of all the publishers in the oligopoly described by the Lariviere, we can see that all of them, despite Springer, which I will come back later, developed from the countries that had this like hegemonic role according to the Wallerstein. And now quickly to reflect this like to supplement this like theoretical reflection with some like historical content, it is important to understand how this publishers, which fortunately like almost all of them publish some kind of like history of their publishing houses, how these publishers was able to stabilize their power, their position over the centuries. And so one more contribution from Wallerstein. It is like we can have some that the role of the state for Wallerstein is mostly securing the processes of accumulation and quasi-monopolies, so like producing some kind of good that has like very strong position in the hot war market that almost no one else can produce. And the more central the state is, the better it is securing this position through legal, military, scientific, or ideological means. And securing this position is also is also done for the publishers by strong personal connections in this like hegemonic or ex-hegemonic states where they develops their publishing houses. So for example, like Harold Macmillan, who is like running publisher Macmillan, that is like currently bought by Springer, like serves as like UK Prime Minister. Bradford Wiley, who developed like Wiley Publisher, is like president of Association of American Publishers. That is like very important for also like developing the copyright law in United States. Richard Tyler is like member of family of like intellectual aristocracy in UK. and Pierre Winken, who is like running contemporary like Elsevier, is also like quite a successful neurosurgeon from Leiden University. So all these publishers have like are able to create broader connection of the with the environment of their states. And so the work of these publishers is also through these connections, like blurring the boundaries between the academic and the private to be able to profit on that. So actually, when we read all these like histories of academic publishers, we can see that the history of a successful publisher is a history of finding the right scholars to collaborate. So, like, for example, like Charles Darwin promoting like the journal Nature, developing some personal connections, or as we can see in this like advertisement for publisher Wiley, that they seek a man who has like a special combination of talent. He must be able to work and live in the academic atmosphere with all its restraints, and yet be an aggressive, sales-minded person. So we can like to summarize, because I don't have like time to go into all the details of like histories of those publishers. We can see that on the one hand, those publishers are strongly supported by the states in which they are developing. So like because of the general like high technological level of like printing in Netherlands, Elsevier in like 70s began like implementing like computers for publishing, and also develops like strong connections with like the University of Leiden. Uh, Public funds are invests in science strongly. Copyright law is developed so the publishers can have huge profits. Researchers are incentivized by the state to collaborate with like publishing. This is like the whole issue also of like evaluations like regimes. There is like a brain drain that we could also like already observe in like 17th centuries, like Netherlands, when the like Descartes etc are traveling to this like central states, and also state legitimize this like central education that also in many cases allows a publisher to export textbooks. But on the other hand, also science and publishers support the state, so like they are quite aware to do not disclose any like military secrets. They legitimize some like colonial like developments in like United Kingdom, and also like scientists legitimize this like education in the central states. And so what's one important like piece for this part is to understand that of course the world of publishing and the practices of publishing are constantly changes. And as we see on this like quotes on the right, when the publishers writing about their publishing, they are fully aware of that it is constantly changing. But what is not changing so much is some kind of like the ownership structure. So when the world is like dynamic, so like for example, like through inheritance in a family, those like publishing houses are able to survive, are able to flourish. So like what world system analysis is interested is much more this like ownership structure than the changing like practices in publishing itself. But like now one could, with this like brief, very long like historical like perspective, one could argue that actually I'm missing something. I'm missing that this oligopoly that developed, as one would said quite recently, has like many like specific characteristics in terms of like volume of publication, in terms of level of like commodification, commercialization of publishing in comparison to, for example, 17th century Netherlands. And I think to understand like the specificity of the situation that we are started to be present in the 20th century, we need to understand the idea of developing hegemonic cycles. And this is developed by Giovanni Arrighi to modify Wallerstein's argument about hegemony. Arrighi argues that hegemony for Wallerstein was much more mechanical results of the system itself. But actually, all these like hegemonic forces for Arrighi had to reshape strongly the system itself. So like where for Wallerstein, who was using this like chordative cycles, etc., like the hegemonic position was like the just a result of some mechanisms in the system, Arrighi argues every of this hegemony has to some extent reinvent some crucial parts of the system. And this like new hegemonic empires were giving answers for the chaos of the crisis of the previous empire. So like the paradigmatic example here is like the US giving like answer for the crisis of the Second World War, and that this new hegemonies build on and return to the solutions previously developed on the system. So there is like something new, but there is also like return to something that already was built through the history of the world system. And what is specific for like hegemony of the USA in the 20th century, it is for sure it is that US hegemony is based on military victory over Germany and Japan, and developing big science, which could be illustrated very well by the using atomic bomb on Japan. And as we can see, it is even in like history of publishing, in this quote from the newspaper article below, that when Robert Maxwell, like the person responsible for developing like publisher Pergamon Press, heard about the using atomic bomb, claimed that it demonstrated to him the power of scientific knowledge, which he can realize he could tap on by publishing that knowledge. So like there is something like specific for the USA hegemony that increased this like production of like scholarly articles, scholarly publications, etc. On the other hand, what Arrighi argues is like specific for US hegemony is return to the model of big international corporations, which was quite characteristic by Netherlands, but it was quite different case in the case of the hegemony of United Kingdom, and also developing hegemony through Bretton Woods institution like International Monetary Fund or World Bank. So there is something like new, this like turn towards great corporations, this turn to this increased output of science, etc., are something that US hegemony, ways by which US hegemony somehow reshaped the system. But also there is like something quite stable that this like new hegemony builds on, and this is like this free ways of like profiting by publishers that we can observe through analyzing their history. And I definitely don't have like time to give more detail on that, but like as I said, despite Springer, all of this like big oligopolistic publishers profits from the past hegemonies. few of them profit from existing hegemony because like they're existing when during this like hegemonic period of the states when they're like developing, and all of them we can find stories when they are important like providers of knowledge for and publications for modernizations of other world system regions. And this is especially important for the success of Springer. Like the success of Springer to very much is connected how US hegemony was built on incorporating German science to the US system. And I don't have now very much time to talk about this like case of like peripherization of Poland. When in the 90s Polish publishing met with this all with this like stable structure was because like socialism collapsed and now we have like quick transition to capitalism, which caused some like declines in the state publishers. They caused like privatizations of the publishers to like I would say like perfect agents of this US hegemony. And also it provided a discussion among like Polish intellectuals, Polish like publishers that on the one hand were somehow uh, inclined towards we could see in like Ben David's like publications from the 70s that the only like response should be this internationalization through like international competition because like our own journals are bad. In our own journals we don't have like good reviews. We need this international competition. On the other hand, publishers were much more opting for some kind of like state protectionism and that somehow maybe state could help them be protected from this international structures. Uh, but I believe like that this methodological rules developed through world system analysis can help us to see that on the one hand it is not a problem that we can develop only through one nation state to have some like protection from nation state that will undermine really those like long structures of like inequality in publishing, but on the other hand that we also cannot limit ourselves to think that the only solution is this international competition because like and we can here like be reminded about this like Wallerstein idea that the university is mostly like the place of like struggle and combat, and we have this like basic world system analysis like methodological rules on the left that I already mentioned, and on the right we have like these rules that would be specific to the academic publishing. That is, as I think I try to present, that is idea of like hegemonic cycles is crucial to understand oligopoly as on the one hand something developed on this like long history of like capitalist development, on the other hand something quite that have some specific characteristics developed in the 20th centuries by USA hegemony. It is important to see from this perspective university as a place of struggle uh, and to focus more on like economic publish position of the publishers and not on this international competition of academics. And sorry, I'm way over time. I definitely overstated the length of this presentation, but I hope we'll still have time for some questions or discussions. So thank you very much for the attention.
Thank you very much, Franek, and thank you all who are still with us. I think it was an exciting paper. If you could, Franek, like turn off the screen sharing, that would be great. So I invite all of you to ask questions to Franek. I believe there are plenty. as always, as my role is to simply fuel up that discussion, I can always start, but I would really encourage you to simply raise your hands and join the discussion. So if you still decide to shy away, I could simply ask Franek a couple of questions. Of course, you could talk about this issue for another hour, I assume. And unfortunately, we ran out of time. But if you could add few details on how you exactly imagine the dialectical relation between the centers and peripheries, because you described skillfully like plenty of different issues, but especially you place the focus on the conditions for development of oligopoly through the hegemonic cycles and how they match these cycles. But what is the dialectical relation between this centrally located oligopoly publishers and more peripheral regions of what? Of scholarly communication sphere or higher education? How you conceive these relationships and what do they produce on the peripheral side?
Yeah, thanks for the question. So like one answer is in this like fair third mode of like profit